I'm Anna Mitchell on the Sunrise Morning Show, and I'm joined in the studio by Robert Muise. He's the co-founder and senior counsel for the American Freedom Law Center, and they are representing Priests for Life in their case against the HHS Contraception mandate. Robert, good morning.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
So what is the status of your case right now?
Well, this past December 31st, we fortunately received an emergency injunction enjoining the application of the mandate as against Priests for Life, and this injunction literally came at the 11th hour on New Year's Eve, because the mandate would have applied in full force to Priests for Life come January 1st, which then would have required them to authorize contraceptive coverage as part of their health care plan, contrary to their sincerely held religious beliefs. And if they didn't provide the contraception, they would have been fined $100 per person per day. So that injunction was exceedingly important to get, and it was good, because to get an injunction, you have to show to the court that you have a substantial likelihood of success on the merits. So after getting the injunction, the court has expedited our case, and so we've got the briefing has been submitted to the court, and we currently have oral arguments scheduled for May 8th before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. We also filed a petition for review with the U.S. Supreme Court under unique rule, Supreme Court Rule 11, which allows you to bypass the courts of appeals and go directly to the Supreme Court if you can show that there's a public imperative that the court take up the case. And we certainly believe that to be the case here, because this mandate applies not just to Priests for Life, but to numerous religious organizations that object to contraception across the country. And the Supreme Court is going to have a conference on our petition on Friday, March 28th. And so that's going to be important. So if they grant review, then we'll be up in the U.S. Supreme Court. So prayers on that will be needed. And certainly if the Supreme Court doesn't grant review, our appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals will continue. And again, we have oral argument in that case on May 8th. So this case really with Priests for Life is the lead case for the nonprofit religious organizations challenging the mandate, similar to how Hobby Lobby was the lead case for the for-profit companies challenging the HHS mandate.
Well, that was going to be my next question. We obviously have been hearing in the news about the recent oral arguments that Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood Specialties had before the Supreme Court over the HHS mandate. So some people might be a little confused. How does your case differ from Hobby Lobby, that you're not actually sort of under the umbrella of the Hobby Lobby case?
Right. Well, it's based on how the regulations apply. Now, when the HHS mandate was put into full force, which went into effect, I believe it was the first plan year beginning after August of 2012. So right away, the for-profit companies were subject to the mandate. Because of the huge outcry of this application of the mandate to religious organizations such as Priests for Life, which is a nonprofit religious organization, not a for-profit company, the administration put in place a temporary enforcement safe harbor. That's what they described it. Essentially, they said, we're not going to enforce the mandate against nonprofit religious organizations. We're going to come up with new regulations that allegedly accommodate the religious objections. Well, we were waiting for those regulations to come out, and they eventually were finalized this past July of 2013, and the accommodation, as you would expect from this administration, was no accommodation at all. What they essentially are doing is forcing the religious organizations to authorize their insurance companies to provide contraceptive coverage to for example, in this case, Priests for Life's plan participants and beneficiaries. But what they're saying is how this accommodates the religious beliefs is that, Priests for Life won't have to pay for the contraception, even though they have to authorize it. And the only reason why their employees receive contraception was because Priests for Life purchased a health care plan. So effectively, this so-called accommodation was forcing Priests for Life to authorize contraceptive coverage for their employees, which they can't do. And so we've objected to that, and then we immediately filed our lawsuit challenging these new rules, these accommodation rules, and so the case is working its way through. So they're being treated differently, the for-profits and the non-profits, under the law. And while Hobby Lobby is ahead, and they're up in the Supreme Court right now, that's because the mandate applied to them in 2012. For Priests for Life, the mandate would have applied to them come January 1, 2014, but we have the injunction in place. So that's why the nonprofit cases are lagging behind a little bit. The other thing that's different, and one of the main issues that's going to be decided by the Supreme Court in the Hobby Lobby case, is whether or not for-profit companies enjoy free exercise rights under the First Amendment in the first instance.
Right.
Well, that's not even a question in our cases. I mean, the government concedes, and the case law is clear, that nonprofit religious organizations such as Priests for Life do enjoy free exercise rights under the First Amendment. And one other point is there were exemptions made under the mandate, but it was so narrowly construed. The exemptions only apply to churches and religious orders, a very narrow exemption based on their IRS tax status. Well, Priests for Life doesn't qualify for the exemption. And if there's any religious organization that should qualify for this exemption, it's Priests for Life. Their very reason for existence is to promote the culture of life. Yeah. So you could even have churches that would be automatically exempt who don't oppose contraception, and yet they would get an exemption, but Priests for Life does not get an exemption, and that is, that's very troubling. And that's why this case is really a great vehicle, we believe, for the Supreme Court to take this issue up and decide it on behalf for the nonprofit religious organizations. And we're very hopeful that if they don't grant this petition, we can still, after we work our way through the courts of appeals, certainly if we win, the government is going to ask the Supreme Court to review it. And if we don't prevail at the Circuit Court, we certainly will ask the Supreme Court. At the end of the day, the Supreme Court is going to be deciding this issue. There's no question.
Yeah, I think so. So let's just remind listeners as a wrap-up here, what is next for Priests for Life case against the HHS mandate, and how can they be praying for this?
Well, certainly the most immediately is our petition for review before the U.S. Supreme Court. It's scheduled to go to conference on Friday, March 28th. So we need to have four justices believe that this is appropriate for them to grant review to take it up right away. We certainly would prefer that option. Also, we have oral arguments scheduled for May 8th, 2013 in Washington, D.C. before a three-judge panel. So your prayers for that are certainly necessary and welcome.
And the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is not exactly friendly to we'll just say it's pretty stacked with Obama appointees right now, correct?
It has recently, but interesting. One of the for-profit cases, Gilardi was the case, Gilardi versus Sebelius. The D.C. Circuit Court ruled in favor of the religious organizations. But that was a particular panel. Unfortunately, the panel that we drew has two very recent Obama appointees. That we definitely need your prayers now on the oral argument. But if the Supreme Court grants review, that will then no doubt be stayed and unnecessary because the case will be up in the U.S. Supreme Court, where it will eventually go. And quite frankly, it's better to get it there sooner rather than later because it's causing a lot of uncertainty for a lot of nonprofit organizations in terms of and their employees whether they're going to even have health care insurance because Priests for Life just can't do it. They just can't violate their core religious beliefs. The way this mandate is forcing them to do so. But I'm very hopeful. There's been a lot of injunctions at the lower levels and the intermediate level federal courts. And in order to get injunctions, you have to show a substantial likelihood of succeeding on the merits. So at the end of the day, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the for-profit cases, Hobby Lobby, from everything that I heard and read about the oral argument, that I think it's going to come out favorable for the freedom of religion, and I'm certainly hopeful the same for the nonprofit religious organizations' challenge to the mandate.
We've been talking to Robert Muise. He's co-founder and senior counsel for the American Freedom Law Center, which is representing Priests for Life in their case against the HHS mandate. Robert, where can listeners find out more about the case?
Well, you can go to our website, AmericanFreedomLawCenter.org. We have all the case updates on our cases section. I know Priests for Life. You do a Google search for the HHS mandate. They provide quite a bit of information as well. So between those two websites, I think we cover all the latest updates and court filings and so forth.
All right, Robert Muise, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.